Good morning, Saturday morning. Hope you've had a good week and that you're well and that we're managing this new normal, the phase that's been in place. Love seeing this. Morning, Marcy. Love seeing this waterfall first thing in the morning. It's amazing. I'd like to sit down there, just under it. Right, morning, hope you're well. I hope you and Gordon are well. Right, let's get cracking. Morning, Willie. Here we go. We swizzle round the Falls of Clyde. Good morning. Good morning, Blackie. Good morning, Fraser. Morning, everybody. Hope everyone's well and had a good week. We're rattling through the alphabet here. T for trauma. My brain immediately went to yoga there, and it was T for torture. I was laughing at myself. Right, so trauma. Goodness, where did we begin with that one? It's a belter. So, in the mid-90s, there was studies done that gave us an indication that 7 out of 10 Americans were more at risk of heart disease, cancers, a stroke. The study would show that 7 out of 10 Americans they're more than likely to have up to 20 years depleted out of their life expectancy when high exposures of trauma was in their lives, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with the ACE movement right now, Adult Childhood Adversity. That's kind of quite trendy. Everybody's jumping about going rah 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 about that at the moment. To put as much effort into actually putting it on the ground and delivering it and making real political change and societal change around it instead of going rah rah rah. We know it's factual. We know it's real. Let's start doing something about it in our own behaviour. So, trauma. What is trauma? Well, trauma is not just like, my girlfriend split up with me when I was at primary school, or trauma being, I failed my driving test a couple of times or something like that. What we mean by trauma is in the emerging child brain, when at exposure, high levels of exposure to stress, toxic stress. Now, what would that look like? So, for those of you listening that's interested in this, in your imagination, shrink yourself like Honey, I've Shrunk the Kids. Shrink yourself to being small, tiny. This little creature. What are your basic needs? Your basic needs are to be loved, and our fundamental wiring as social creatures is for attachment. I talk about that continually. If you're interested in attachment and attunement, as I've said, you've got experts in the field, Melanie Klein, Bowlby, Winnicott. There's loads and loads and loads, right? It's just attachment. Google it. What is attachment theory? But we are hardwired for as a social animal, as a social creature. We are hardwired for attachment over anything else, right? So you're this little person. Shrink yourself back down. You're in your cot, you're this small child, and you're craving attachment, right? You've got an absent parent, you've got an emotionally unavailable parent, you've got a parent that may have just been experiencing postnatal depression because of giving birth to this little bundle of joy that's not able to connect or attune with you. You've got a highly stressed set of parents. You've got parents that are involved in alcohol and substance misuse. You've got it's you know, the basic, and in a lot of cases even the basic needs of children aren't met, but the basic needs such as the nappy getting changed, etc., maybe getting taken care of, a bottle maybe getting stuffed into your mouth now and then. But what if there's no attachment? So why are we talking about that when it's about trauma? Because that could be our earliest of traumas, the lack of attachment and attunement. Now, as we're speaking about all of this stuff, we've got to kind of really beam out of ourselves a bit and float out and think outside the box, because cognition, certainly language, doesn't start to develop in the emergence of a child until it's 18 months onwards. So if a trauma occurred pre-cognition, right, that's the light that's beaming in the distance, that how could you cognitively ever go back and rectify? Okay, so your mother had postnatal depression, your father was absent, there was no father, you were single, brought up in single parent house with a mother that had postnatal depression, right? So the first 2 or 3 years of your development, you had emotionally unavailable parenting, right? So let's just look at that could be an original trauma. Traumas that occur later on in life now start to get diagnosed as, good morning Laurie, good morning Nicole, right? Traumas that then start to get diagnosed later on in life could be post-traumatic stress disorder, etc, etc. But let's look at earliest of development traumas, because what we want to know is what's driving the addiction, what's driving the separation, what's driving the violence, what's driving the greed, what's driving the capitalist mindset of competition, greed, separation. Because I don't know if it's just me and I might be completely tripping right now, but I seem to see a lot more separation and division going on in our world than I see connection, unity, and the stuff that really matters. So in our society, there's a lack of attachment. There's a lack of attachment to the self, because if there was an attachment to the self, there wouldn't be the behaviours that's going on. And and it's a sense of self. Now, if there's no attachment to the self, and you've got no attachment, and the only way that you can attach or feel attached at any level is when you've had a couple of scoops, you've sniffed a few lines, you're flirting, or you know, you're married, you've got kids, but yet you spend more time on social media, or you spend more time, and you know, anybody at that point, if you're not getting your needs met within your relationship, you know, if a car park attendant shows you a bit of attention, you're going to grasp onto it, you're going to try and grab it, right? Because why? Because that's our fundamental need. Our fundamental need is for attachment and attunement, okay? And having a sense of trust in ourselves and learning to trust our own gut. Now, when we've been taught as well, I'm going to jump about a bit with this. When we've been taught not to trust our gut feeling, when we've been taught not to trust our gut feeling and push those feelings down from a very early age, we don't have a sense of self. We don't have a sense of who we are, what it is that we want. Now, an explanation for that could be children are far more perceptive than we give them credit for. Think back to when you were a kid, little 7-year-old, even younger. You knew exactly what was going on. You may not have the capacity to drive a car. You may not have the capacity to put together theories and complicated mathematical equations. But think back. You were working from a sense, a perceptual sense of intuition and understanding that you knew what was going on in your environment. So I'm giving you an example. You walk into a room where there's a couple of adults. Now, adults in a child world are like God. Those adults have had a fight, or they might have just had sex or something like that. They've done something that they would want to hide from the child. And the child goes in and they're like, you know, is everything all right? And the parents say, yeah, everything's fine. Child's got this feeling inside them, this gut sense, doesn't feel right. something doesn't feel right to me. No, everything's okay. So what you start to do is you believe the caregiver, you believe the adults, you believe these gods, these hierarchical gods that you have in your world, and you start to dampen your gut feeling, you start to dampen your own intuition, you start to dampen your own authority. And when you do that, you then have a secondary break of attachment, because you then break the connection to an attachmental source, which is a fundamental part of our senses, which is how we perceptually navigate our environment. So we shut off from that, and we have a broken attachment, we have a broken bonding to our intuition, to our gut feeling, to our perceptual way that we navigate the world. And then we feel lost because of that, right? Now, the reason I'm talking about this is the majority of the work that I do is around addiction, which undoubtedly then becomes a lot of the work that I do is around trauma. So, not all people who have been traumatised become addicts, but all addicts have been traumatised. So what differentiates them? What creates the difference? So a lot of people would say, oh, we were born an addict. I don't buy into that. I believe that we have a susceptibility towards addiction, where cancer's in our genes. Well, cancer is in our genes. Smoking causes cancer. Well, no, it doesn't. Because if that was the case, then every person that smoked would have cancer. My grandfather smoked. He was 90 years old, died. Never had any cancer. It was the cancer that killed him. He smoked from he was 9. My friend's gran lived till she was she was nearly like a centurion. Smoked like 20 cigarettes a day, wee tiny woman. Cancer didn't kill her. So, yes, cigarettes can have an effect in cancer. And yes, cigarettes aren't good for us. However, it's the susceptibility to the cancerous gene that we have that's formulated from what? It's formulated from a backdrop of stress. What is stress? Cortisol, adrenaline. Now, let's rewind back to that little person. If you're still, Honey, I've Shrunk the Kids, and you're still that little person. Imagine this little person that has no linguistic processing. It's completely just this little bundle of joy, and it's terrified for its existence. It's terrified with these two adults that are shouting, these two adults that are they're co-inhabiting, they're married, but there's absolutely no connection. What, kids don't see that? Really? Don't be so silly. Or we're just staying together for the kids. What a lot of codwapple that is. Look at the studies that show that children that have experienced divorce early on in their life, in men, children that have experienced divorce early on in their life are something like 50% more susceptible to having a stroke by the age of 60 than children that weren't, right? But imagine living in a house where you've still got mum and dad, there's absolutely no connection. You tell the kids that everything's all right when everything's not all right, because when they go up to bed, the arguing starts, right? The children are hearing that, they're feeling that, they're sensing that. There's a huge amount of stress, which is cortisol. Look at what cortisol does to the body. It thins bones, makes bones more brittle. It makes us more susceptible to disease. It makes us more susceptible to cancers, strokes, lung cancer. So stress caused by traumatic experiences, right, is what then makes us more susceptible and even more flawed, right? Which, when we're even more flawed, then sets up another set of circumstances where this capitalist society have got us completely and utterly by the balls. Because what we then think we do is we can buy our way out of it. We can buy our way out of this feeling of inadequacy, of stress, of trauma. So then we start trying to fill the void. We start to try and fill the bottomless pit with consumables, with addiction, with fashion, with friends, with who we think we are. And actually, that's not helpful. So, trauma. Adverse childhood experiences, if you're interested in that. As I said, that's kind of quite trendy right now. Lots of people are talking about it. I'd like to see more getting done. Whereas a lot of people aren't paying attention to it because... And the reason why it's like... as I said, I'm jumping about with this a bit because it's a really difficult thing to try and nail down in one singlet because it's so multi-dimensional. But you know, it's like for me, making a really radical statement here, trauma is at the back of everything, right? I would stand on that. Trauma is at the back and hiding and lurking behind the curtains of addiction, of aggressiveness, of isolation, of loneliness, of depression, of anxiety. As I said yesterday, when we started to look at shame, resilience, RS and T, man, they're real high impact things for me. So trauma sits in the backdrop of majority of mental health issues that I see and look at. Now, the radical statement that I'm going to make is that physicians, doctors, psychologists and psychiatrists will turn round and they're in denial of that. We need to do more research. How much more research do you need to do? How much more research do we need to look and do with addiction? With people that have suffered from addiction, that have used it as a coping mechanism against what? Against trauma. Let's stop asking society why the addiction. Let's start asking our clients, what's the pain? In fact, let's go and look at our doctors, our physicians, even our psychologists that are treating individuals, and let's go and look at their curriculum and let's go and see how much time they spent working on shame. None. Very, very little. In fact, let's go and look at our Western medicine, our great NHS workers. Let's go and look at our doctors and let's go and look at their curriculum and let's go and look at how much education they had on diet. Let's go and look at, morning Colin, let's go and look at our physicians, our great Western medicine, the great pharmaceutical Western society that's got it all working. Really, another illusion. Working. We've got more children with ADHD, Asperger's, mental health issues, childhood self-harm than ever before. But we've got this great service. No, go and look at your doctor's curriculum. Go and look at how much education they had on diet. None. Ask your doctor, what do you know about shame? How much time did you spend at university? 7 years. How much time did you spend studying shame? None. And that's who you're going to go and see and get your diagnosis from. That's in your hand. And yes, for a rapid response, and as I said, if I fall off my motorbike and I phone the 999 call, or whatever it is, 101 or whatever you phone, I'm going to utilise where they've got to within medicine. But let's look at why our country's in the state that it's in, our world's in the state it's in. So, I jumped off there. We need to do more research. How much more research? How much more research do we need to do on the fact that there is a direct correlation between substance misuse and trauma? None. We don't need to do any more research on that. I am 100% convinced with the studies that I have read that there's a direct link. Okay, next. How much more research do we need to do that there's a direct correlation between trauma and mental health? My opinion, radical statement, none. And the reason I'm saying that is I genuinely do not know what labyrinth the intellects and academics have lost themselves down for what would seem the last bloody 100 years. I really don't. I really do not know what labyrinth of intellectual nonsense they've had themselves locked down in order that they think they need to do more research. But it came to me. It came to me probably about, I don't know, last few years anyway. The reason they don't want to look at it, and the reason that people don't want to look at it, is because they're in denial to it. And why? Because it's black. It's a black, toxic, horrible, destructive subject, trauma, what if it is real? What if we do accept this? Now what? What do we do about it? And I genuinely don't think that there's many people out there that have got the courage to actually work. And I'm going to be really hypothetical here, but it's almost like you look at all these, so many people are working from the waist up. They work, if you believe in chakras, I don't really like that word, but let's just say that there is this system that runs through our body, right? I know it's not going to work for everybody, but just humour me. They work from the waist up. Yeah, they work here and they work very cerebral. They work in the brain. Where's trauma stored? Trauma's stored down in the lower levels of the body, from the waist down, right? Now, Ayurvedic, Chinese medicine, Eastern medicine, right? They've been looking at this stuff for 5,000 years, right? Look at our pharmaceutical, look at our Western doctors. How old is that? A couple of 100 years old, Andrew Carnegie and all that jazz. Fired up, let's start drug dealing. Right, let's start looking at the symptoms, and do you know what? Just forget about the cause, because it doesn't really matter. Let's just keep medicating. So then you get a medicine to put on top of a medicine, to put in another medicine, to put in another medicine, and then another medicine. Great. Right, so you're now on 15 different medicines and you're not getting any better. Magic. That seems to be working for me. Right? But without slagging them, they've not been educated in the right way. Right? And I'd like to see real psychologists that have actually looked at their own trauma, that have actually done their own work, right? I'd like to see counsellors. They're great, they're academically studied, they've done their work. Have you actually looked at the amount of trauma that's in your family system, right? That authoritarian system that you were brought up in, how that made you feel as a developing child, right? Yes, I'll be a good little girl and I'll shut off from all my emotions, right? Private schools and certainly boarding schools, and we look at those Etonian ways of educating children. Look at those clients when they come in through our doors. They are completely and utterly switched off from their feelings. They're just this head. They are absolutely, completely devoid of any emotion. And what would we call somebody that's devoid of any emotion? Well, in the DSM-5, that's a psychopath. Right? But we look at that old great Britannia rule, that old great education system, where you were actually stiff upper lip and you were taught not to feel your feelings. Why? Because nobody really knew what to do with them. So the best thing to do with them is just delete that programme, right? Feelings are really complicated, so let's not do them. So I'm feeling the same sort of thing about trauma. Trauma is a really dark, very heavy, very sticky subject. But if you're interested and you're healing from addiction or anything like that, I would absolutely encourage you to look and not blame. This is not and we live in such a blame culture. You know, I know somebody, right, that went into therapy around about the same time as me in 1993. And unfortunately, they've just not moved on. They're still blaming their mum. Their mum's been dead for about 15 years, right? And they're still babbling on. They're still sticking up on Facebook, oh, my mum done this to me. Right? Which brings me to what we could talk about with victim. Yeah, we become so identified with being a victim that we wear the victim with a badge of honour. As I said yesterday, somebody stuck up on Facebook that they'd been raped. Why would you do that? Why would you publicly tell a community that you've been raped? It's a horrible, disgusting thing. Let's see how many likes I can get for telling the people that I've been raped. I mean, it's like, wow. Why is this person still went into therapy around about the same time as me, as I said, in about 1993? And we were kind of with a parallel kind of journey. And they're still babbling up on Facebook and putting up things on Facebook about, my mum abused me. Right, okay. Let's move on from that now. Right, that was probably 50 odd years ago that happened. Now, if you can't move beyond the trauma and you're in therapy, you're not in the right therapy. Because what happens, let's keep it quite simple, and my basic understanding, right, my basic understanding of human development, right, which is looking at it, I guess, from a biopsychosocial model of behavioural change, right, but let's look at it that you've got this child, and this child comes into the world, and it's probably as close to oneness as it's ever going to be, right, it's connected to love and joy and just giggles and goo-goos and gagas, and has this ability to transiently move through its emotions from sadness to anger to laughter, hysterical laughter, and then sadness again, right? It doesn't get caught up in it. It doesn't get caught up in those feelings. Now, then a trauma comes along, or stress comes along, right? Whack. The child's then forced. That's not the right word. Let me find the right word. So the child is this bundle of joy connected to sort of one field of unifiedness, right? And somewhere in its development, a trauma occurs. Within that trauma, there's almost a place where the developing child disconnects from source, right? And in that disconnection from self, there's a trauma in there, right? Because a lot of the work that we attempt to do with adults is reconnecting itself, because we're looking to bring the adult back to wholeness, bringing the adult back to more unity. But in order to do that, we've got to reconnect with the broken aspects of ourselves. So in order to do that somatically, we don't do that cerebrally, we don't do that cognitively. That's a bodily feeling. That's a bodily feeling when we react, when we start to convulse and react, as we start to reconnect to those very early parts of ourselves that's been broken, right? Now, you're not going to get to that. I'm just going to be completely frank. You're not going to get there with CBT. You're not going to get there with doing 2 or 3 sessions of counselling. You're certainly not going to get there with neuro-linguistic programme or seeing a coach that done a weekend in a place in Glasgow. You're going to get there with somebody that's actually done the work on themselves, not just read it in a book, right? Why is that? Because we, as through attachment, we will always gravitate towards the transmarginal depths of a significant other. If that significant other has healed their wounds and fused those fractures in places where they have disconnected from themselves, right, then that almost unconsciously gives you permission to gravitate towards that place of what seems like safety. Allow yourself to start to experience attachment, which you've never had, with that significant other. And if you're doing the work with an effective therapist, then there's not a dependency starts to get made between you, because you can only experience that when you're with that significant other, right? If you're working with an effective therapist, it gives you the tools in order to go away. It's like going with a stabiliser on a bike, right? And then you take the stabilisers off. You've got to learn how to go the bike without the stabilisers, right? Whereas I see people that have been in therapy for 3, 4, 5 years. It's like, when are they going to let you take the stabilisers off, right? Or they're still dependent. And I'm no slagging the 12-step. 12-step brought me back to sanity, gave me my serenity. Love the 12-step process. I talk about it all the time. I'm a complete advocate of it. But what, you're still going to 12 fellowship meetings 25 years down the line? No, I still drop in. But I'm not there every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night, Saturday morning, right? Now, okay, for some, that's just what's required. And if it keeps them sober, great. But where within there is the codependency not getting addressed and allowing the individual to start to then rely on their own resources, right? I hope that's making sense. Trauma. It's a huge, huge subject, and by the mere merit that we're here and we're in a world that's completely a shit show, right, where there's no connection, where there's more isolation, where there's less and less authenticity, and that authenticity can only come when you can get back to your own gut and get back to your own heart. People are walking about as robots, programmed robots. The fear of artificial intelligence already coming. Man, it's already here. The majority of folk are walking about. How do you feel about that? What kind of question is that? How do I feel about that? How do you feel about that? Don't know. Don't know how to answer that. Can't compute. You can see their eyes going. Drrr. Do you like your new car? How do you feel? Yes, it's nice. It's like people have become so rigid. What's the cause of that? The cause of that is trauma, right? Big trauma, broken attachment and attunement. Then authenticity. Authenticity is very connected to the gut feeling. When you don't trust your gut, how can you be authentic? Because authenticity is your gut, living in your gut, living from your gut, right? They're the kind of things that got us here. Look, we have been in the making for millions and millions of years, right? We weren't, try and think a wee bit beyond 1970, 1960, 1950. Try and think back to what life was like. How did we get to where we are? Attunement, attachment, and authenticity. We had to think on our feet. We had to be adaptable. We had to be responsive, right? Responsibility, the ability to respond. You can only be responsive and have the ability to respond when you're what? When you're authentic. How do you become more authentic? You start to get into your gut a wee bit, right? And start to make those new connections. So I hope you have a fantastic, absolutely fantastic Saturday. And thank you very much for tuning in. T for trauma. It's way complicated. Do you know what? Doing a wee Facebook Live for 20 minutes on trauma just doesn't do it justice. Really, you need a couple of days at least, a couple of weeks at least, to actually dissect it. But if this has made sense to you, if you are suffering from addiction or anxiety, let's start looking at the source of it, but not with blame. Our parents were probably very scared, not attached, working from a personality. Look at the parents that had to live their life by the Bible because they were so terrified of who they were that they needed this book to live their life by, and then ram it down your throat, or let you do what you want because they were completely numbed out and couldn't be bothered with kids running about. So just you go out and do what you like, right? I go out and play for 14 hours. Come in when the street lights go out, and you could have been away all day. I would really encourage you to look deeper into trauma. There's some great experts out there in trauma. Peter Levine's probably my favourite. There's a massive amount. People, have a great weekend, everybody. And if you are suffering from addiction and places where you don't feel that you're authentic and you're your authentic self, and there's a lack of love in your life and there's a lack of connection in your life, and you're old before your time, there's no laughter, there's no humour, you've lost the ability to have some joy. Maybe it is trauma that's hiding behind the curtain, that's hiding behind the backdrop. And get an effective trauma therapist. Look at people that have done their work and dive right in, take the bull by the horns. Have a fantastic day. Thank you very much for listening, tuning in to the alphabet of mental health. And more people need to start talking about it, but not from a place of victim, not from wearing it as a badge of honour. It happened. Let's not blame it. Let's name it. Let's not blame it. Let's tame it. And let's use our experiences to put our hand out to somebody and be a lifeline to somebody else, because people are dying because of this shit. And, it becomes less funny when folk are snorting lines all the time and drinking booze all the time as a way to try and get away for themselves. So I wish you all the best. Have a great day. Do the best you can.